Gender Equality Agency, and thank you so much for joining us today for a quick update on the WGEA Reforms and what it means for you. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners from the many lands we're joining together today. I'm on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation. So, very exciting time from our perspective at WGEA. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency and the Act that forms us was amended and passed by the Parliament unanimously last week, which is very exciting. And this means we do have a new roadmap to close the gender pay gap. These reforms, I think, will make a big difference on helping Australia regain a real leadership position as being one of the best places in the world for workplace gender equality. It'll mean 4.5 million employees will have much deeper insights into how their employers value men and women, and for prospective employees they'll have more information as well when they're making their choices about where they work. So we see this as a massive opportunity for employers to bring out the gender equality strategy that they have, develop a new one if there's not one already, and really drive improvement and change in their workplaces in the time to come. So some of the key points, first of all, in terms of the changes, and this is both in the Act and a legislative instrument that supports it, is that the first thing that's going to change is that employers must give their executive summary report and their industry benchmark report to their employers, to their board, sorry. So reporting's happening as normal. It's actually open today, which is great. And after we have closed off and we do have broad industry data, we provide those reports back to employers. And we think that engaging with the board and the governing body is absolutely critical to helping to drive change. The next thing that will happen is that WGEA employers must also provide additional information in their reporting, not this year, but next year. Many of the questions are voluntary this year, but it will be mandatory next year. And they're things like age of the employee, their primary workplace location, we're adding in CEO remuneration. Many of these are voluntarily answered at the moment, but everyone will be required to answer those next year. There's also new questions out of the Respect at Work report on sexual harassment or discrimination. And there's quite a comprehensive set of questions there. Once again, voluntarily this year, mandatory next year. So really encourage all employers to try and report on them this year so that they can establish that information, know what the base is, and work to improve in relation to those aspects, really critical aspects of their work. So voluntary this year, mandatory for 23-24 reporting next year. Early next year, we will be publishing for the private sector reporting employers the gender pay gaps. So that'll be based on this year's reporting numbers, and we'll be reporting them by mean, median and quartile in an ongoing basis. We won't actually be doing mean in the first year because we don't yet have the CEO remuneration, but in an ongoing basis, that's how they'll be published, and it will be by median and quartile starting next year. Companies will be able to publish a document in conjunction with the publishing of their gender pay gaps. And this is another opportunity for employers to really have those strategies, have the action plans, understand where the issues are in terms of their gender pay gap, and have a plan for how they're going to address them. And these documents will be very helpful, and we'll be providing some information to guide that if you don't have a strategy in place already. We will also, over time, be publishing that information for the federal public sector, and that'll be they're mandatorily reporting this year for the first time. So that's going to be a little bit further down the track, but that's coming as well. So they're the main changes in terms of what needs to happen. And the reason we're doing this is because, the government, there was a review of our Act led by the government. They're very committed to closing the gender pay gap. And the review said that publishing gender pay gaps was one of the critical areas that could help to accelerate the rate of change. As we know, there has been improvement over time, but it's slow. pace of improvement is glacial, and in fact it stalled last year with the gender pay gap exactly the same as the year before. And so the evidence from the UK, where they've been reporting these gender pay gaps for since 2017, is that it does improve things. The research shows that it's motivated employers to prioritise gender equality and has contributed to a significant drop in the gender pay gap in the UK. That employers are now investigating the cause of their gender pay gaps, and there's more accountability and engagement with the board, which ties into having to provide those reports to the board as well. There has been a narrowing of the gender pay gaps, particularly where an employer has a high gender pay gap or their gender pay gap is high relative to the rest of their industry. So, those who are the poorer performers on this front are actually taking action. And interestingly, we've also seen that employers are now more likely to include wage information in job ads, which is another, that transparency in terms of that, we know helps inform decision-making in relation to both people deciding to take jobs, but also negotiating in terms of salary. So there's a number of pieces of evidence that show that publishing gender pay gaps is worthwhile and it makes a difference. So WGEA will be helping. There'll be regular communications in terms of timing and how we can assist. We're developing further resources and tools such as a more comprehensive gender pay gap calculator for the website, action planning tools in terms of gender equality strategies, and we have a team here ready to help and work with you in relation to the changes that are to come. So very happy to take a few questions now, and hopefully that snapshot gives you an idea of the changes that are happening. Now, first question, and please get your questions in on the chat. We're very happy to take them, is a question from Lucy that says, what can businesses do to prepare for these changes? So thanks for that question. And there's a number of things that can be done. First of all, I would suggest that do your reporting this year, absolutely critical, but download your previous executive summaries and your industry benchmark reports, because that'll tell you what your gender pay gap currently is, and what and some components of your gender pay gap in terms of different types and categories of staff. Pull out your gender equality strategy, or if you don't have one, start to develop one. Think about an action plan, understand where those gaps are from your benchmark reports and some more analysis, and then think about how you're going to address them. That'll mean you're well prepared when you have the opportunity to put some further information up alongside your published gender pay gap about what you're doing to drive change. And if you're not collecting the data that will become mandatory next year already, please try and report it voluntarily this year. Age, location, CEO remuneration, and those really critical questions about sexual harassment or discrimination, that's going to be quite important. The last thing I'd mention is that I forgot to say in terms of our list is for larger companies with 500 or more employees, they will be required to not just have one strategy for the 6 gender equality indicators that frame how we work, but actually to have a policy or strategy for all 6. And that actually starts next year as well. So thinking about what your strategies are in place. Do you have it for your board composition? Do you have it for equal remuneration? Do you have it about consulting with your employees? Work through all of those 6 gender equality indicators and start to develop those strategies and policies, so by the time you're required to do that next year and report on that, you'll have those in place. Because of course, it's not just having the strategies and policies in place, but it's that translation of that to how they impact and how they improve the environment that you create in the workplace that's important. But the policy and the strategy is a critical starting point. Got another question here from Vicky Ray, and once again, if there's any other questions in the chat, please put them in. Vicky Ray asks, as pay is usually seen on a binary model of men and women, what does this mean for our gender diverse colleagues? And that's a great question. So there's 3 pieces of work as a result of the review that I mentioned that we're still doing. The first is to work out how to include a broader definition of gender, not just the male and female definitions that are currently in the Act, to include people who identify as non-binary or may use other terms. And that work's currently happening in terms of how that would be reflected in both our Act and the instrument to enable us to formally collect that information. We currently have the ability in a voluntary way for employers to report on their non-binary employees. And once again, if you collect that information, we encourage you to report that to us. At the moment, about 14% of companies are reporting non-binary employees as part of their workplace profile. On the broader aspect of other aspects of diversity, we're also doing more work about how we can collect that information, how we support employers to create a safe environment for them to collect it in the first place, and some are, but many are not, and then how that would enable them to report that through to us so that we would have this incredible wealth of information in relation to broader aspects of diversity and their experiences at work, from calculating gender pay gaps to workforce composition, seniority, accessing parental leave, all of those sorts of things. So that work is happening. And the third area of work that is still happening as well is how larger companies could be required to set targets and actually report against them and achieve those targets as, once again, a mechanism to create momentum for accelerating change. So thanks, Vicky Ray, for that question. We have another question from Caroline that says, where will the gender pay gaps be published? Will employees be able to find this information? And the answer is absolutely. So we have this incredible resource on our website called the Data Explorer. And so please go to wgea.gov.au and have a look at our Data Explorer. At the moment, it publishes all the information except for remuneration about the companies that report to us. So if you want to know what a specific company's workforce composition is in terms of managers and non-managers, if you want to know how many weeks parental leave they offer, what sort of flexible work options are in place, what their board composition is, all of that is currently published on our Data Explorer. As I say, it's a wealth of information. But what we will be doing is adding to our Data Explorer with the gender pay gap information, which we've been limited from doing before. So that's where it will be published. It will be fully accessible so that employees can see it, prospective employees can see it, generate those conversations and hopefully create some momentum for positive change. And that's also where, and it'll probably be a link, we're working through the technology at the moment, the opportunities for employers to provide information that talks about why they think their gender pay gap is where it's at and what they're doing about it. Now we have another question from Anonymous that will historical gender pay gap data be reported as part of this package or only publishing data from 2024? So it's a good question, and we will only be able to publish going forward. That information hasn't been available. We haven't been allowed to publish it, and this doesn't allow us these legislative changes to go retrospectively. But we will be publishing from next year, early next year, about this year's data, and we will have that time series from here. So one of the critical things we'll see is who's improving, how much are they improving, and where the change is happening. So that obviously we already publish industry gender pay gap data, occupational gender pay gap data, and a national gender pay gap number. But this individual employer gender pay gap will start from early next year and then continue into the future. So last question from Alex. I've got some changes coming up for my business. I'm worried it might impact my gender pay gap. How do I make sure that my workers don't get put off by this? Well, actually, the evidence from the UK is that the employees actually, it didn't cause problems. It actually was, I think it was 3% of employees said that there was some disquiet as a result. but it's about positioning this as an opportunity. This isn't meant to be a negative exercise. This is meant to be a positive exercise in terms of, yep, we've got our gender pay gap, but we know what's driving it and we know what we need to change. And we've got these plans in place in terms of how we're going to address it. We see this as a critical, both thinking, but also communication opportunity to employees. And we will be providing some resources and support in terms of for employers to utilise as part of all of this. But it is thinking about how this creates an opportunity for change and improvement rather than being seen as negative. So great questions. Please go to our website. There's a page already there that explains in some detail all of the things that I've talked about today. If there's any more questions, please put them in our chat. Our team will get back to you with responses. And this is just the start of this journey, and we really look forward to working with you, providing the support to make sure that we do achieve the objective from this, which is accelerating change on gender equality, creating those gender equal workplaces so that everyone can maximise their potential and capabilities and skills in the workplace for the benefit of us all. Thanks for joining us today.